Hello, everyone. This is Baika, your host at BYKE. We are hosting Global Educators once a month. And if you haven't seen any of our videos, let me give you a brief intro of what our webinars are. We hold these sessions once or twice a month, and the name kind of speaks for itself. We invite speakers and educators, coaches, anyone working with children or mentees to come on our show to share their story and message to all of the people around the world. We previously had speakers from Asia, North America, and Europe, over three continents and 10 different countries and nationalities. Today, we have a very unique topic. The topic is today's episode is called Strength-Based Teaching, and we have an author, an educator, a therapist. He is one of the most amazing educators. He will be here talking about this concept and introducing his book. He is the author of a book called Teaching with a Strength-Based Approach. So he'll be sharing all of the important details and concepts about the book. First, let me invite him. His name is Steve. Please, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Becca. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Stephen Barron. I'm a psychologist. I'm from New York. That's where I'm speaking to you from. And basically, a little bit about me. For 30 years, I was a psychologist working in the school system. I provided, counseling and support to students in elementary through secondary schools. I did that for 30 years, and I've since retired from that. And at the same time, I had a private practice where I work in a clinical setting with children, adolescents, and their families for a variety of issues. And that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation and coming on this show. And we are extremely happy to have you.
Thank you. Same here.
Short background about your career and psychologist. Who motivated you or who inspired you to become a psychologist?
Wow, that's a great question. When I began college, I didn't know about being a psychologist. I went through a little bit of a journey until I figured it out. I thought about being a journalist, a reporter. Then I thought about being an attorney. And then I thought about going into finance. And I took classes in each of these things. And for one reason or another, it didn't really pique my interest to stay with it. But I remember there was a class I took in college as an undergraduate, and the teacher it was a psychology class, and the teacher was a psychologist, and I just really felt very captivated by it. He spoke about how psychology can help people in their everyday life. It wasn't just dealing with clinical problems. It was helping people enhance the quality of life for people, every day. And that really resonated with me. And I decided that I'm going to pursue this somewhat. So I took more classes in it, and I did some volunteer work at the time. And I decided eventually that this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. And I applied to graduate school, and here I am today, a psychologist.
That is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that journey. And anyone that who's struggling to find the best career or job, this might be a great insight for them because I know a lot of students pressure themselves to find the best major after 4 years, but maybe it takes a long time. But you have a lot of
It
experience
could.
in different industries. So okay, so we'll move. Thank you for our intro. And the main concept or the core part of our today's webinar is about your new book. Can you
Yes.
share a bit about the book and when it was published? And go ahead.
Well, the book is called Teaching with a Strength-Based Approach, and it was published last year, actually the year before, June of 2023. by a publisher called Routledge. Routledge publishes here in the States. It's available through them and on Amazon as well. And the premise of the book is looking at the relationship between the teacher and the student. When I was a school psychologist for 30 years, I had a front row seat of seeing how educators can impact their students, how they can motivate them. And intuitively, I began to see that it was those teachers that would go out of their way to foster a relationship with their students that got the most responsiveness from their students. The students were the most engaged. They wanted to produce effectively in the classroom. And that relationship was a key variable, along with the idea that one of the things I had to do in my job was to do evaluations of students who were struggling, who had different learning challenges or emotional challenges. And during those evaluations, there was a very big emphasis on what was the student struggling with, what was wrong with the student, what are the student's deficits. And I began to feel there wasn't enough attention being paid to what's right about the kids. What resources do they have? What do they bring to the table? What can they do well? So I began to incorporate more of that concept, more of that way of thinking in my work. And there was a whole field of psychology called positive psychology, which looks exactly at this. It looks at, what's right about people, what assets, what strengths do they have? How can we tap into those to make them the best version of themselves? And what I talk about in my book is how to combine these two ideas in terms of having a relationship with the student, as well as trying to bring out the best in them, trying to tap into their very treasures, if you will. And the book is really written for educators. It's kind of a how-to. It's sort of a manual in terms of how teachers can do that. How teachers can identify the strengths of children, how they can have children discover things about themselves that they may not even know. So we talk about things such as helping children become more optimistic, helping children not be so fearful of making a mistake, uh, helping children begin to identify what they do well, and so forth. And I give various exercises and ideas for teachers in the book to do this. And I think really the main takeaway would be that it is a relationship, that variable between teacher and student, I think that will determine how successful a student is in your classroom. And also, I think it resonates with why teachers become teachers in the first place. What was their joy in becoming a teacher? Why did they go into it? To connect with students, to bring out the best in them. So I try to apply a positive psychology approach in terms of helping teachers and students identify what's good about the students. What do they do well? And how to use those assets. And not that we ignore deficits, we don't, because those are important to identify. But you have a choice. Do you fix what's broken, or do you try to strengthen what's already good? And I think there's a lot of data to show that building up kids is really much more effective at doing that. Excuse me. And it also enhances the relationship you have with the teacher and the student.
That is so fascinating, and thank you for the wonderful explanation and all of the details about the book. So this is a great book for any educators that if you want to build a strong relationship with your student, if you find yourself struggling, you want to make a connection with students, and this could be a great book for teachers and also for parents as well. Just earlier, you talked about how you want to build up students, and that's like so amazing. And a lot of, I think, teachers, we kind of forget because we're so heavily focused on our content. Or like if let's say
Mm.
if I'm teaching physics, like I'm so focused on an exam. There are a lot of those drawbacks in a lot of education systems around Asia. So I'm from Asia. I'm teaching in Vietnam. And so next, I'm going to move on to the next question. Uh,
Just one point to add to that, Baika, is that this emphasis on content, we have the same thing here in the United States. And in many places, the students have to take tests at the end of the school year to assess their knowledge. And sometimes teachers are evaluated based on how their students do. And I understand this puts a lot of pressure on teachers, and teachers might listen to this and feel, well, I don't have time to to go out of my way to do, what he writes about in the book. I have to teach physics, or I have to get these Spanish concepts in, or what have you. And I would say it doesn't have to be an either or kind of thing. I would say that you don't have to choose academics over emotional well-being in your classroom. I think the two go together very well. And I think it is well worth your investment in terms of trying to connect with your students, because I think you will find that it will help them relate to you and could also help them feel more connected to the content as well.
that's wonderful. That's such an interesting point that you made, how academic and relationship can go together. And
Hmm.
for me, like when I first started teaching, I was kind of really struggling because I felt like, getting and delivering results or getting high points and scores is really important. And we kind of forget the mental health part. But you brought up such an interesting point, and thank you for sharing that with me and also for our audience. Um, let's go
Right.
into like who and what motivated you to write the book.
While I was a school psychologist, had mentioned earlier that I did assessments of students, and we had to identify their deficit areas in order for them to get supports or services in the school. And I felt that in many ways, that system, that way of looking at kids, really gave a lot of emphasis to what was wrong with them. And staff and parents were very, very interested in what was wrong with them in terms of, okay, what will my child get? Will the child get extra help? Will they get special education services here? And I felt that there wasn't enough attention being paid to what this child does well. And in a way, when you're assessing children and it's just a focus on what's wrong with them, it creates kind of a mindset of hopelessness, I felt, and both for the evaluator and for the child and for the family. You identify these problems and then, now what? And I thought that while it is important to identify where the child may be struggling because you want to plan interventions, it's just as important to identify where the child's strengths are. And for me, what led to me to really go down this path even more, I remember I got a flyer in the mail, a brochure about a conference, all about positive psychology in children, building resilience, enhancing a child's ability to bounce back from stress. And that really resonated with me. And I attended it and I was hooked. I just felt this is the way I really want to work. This is what I want to emphasize in my clinical work and my work in the school setting. And I began to really submerge myself in learning about positive psychology. And I tried to bring back and incorporate this way of working in my school job. It was a little difficult there because, the culture was such that, why aren't they reading? Why aren't they sitting still? Why aren't they doing this or that? As opposed to the opposite in terms of what they're doing well. But I was able to bring it into my clinical work with children who I see privately. And the book grew out of that. When I retired and I had time, I decided that I wanted to write about ways to help teachers incorporate the principles of positive psychology, how to enhance gratitude, how to bring up optimism, um, how to improve a child's self-concept. These are very important things for children because all of these can impact their functioning in your classroom. Recently, in the United States, as well as the rest of the world, obviously we dealt with the pandemic with COVID and the statistics, particularly here in the States that I'm aware of children dealing with anxiety and depression have skyrocketed. Since the start of the pandemic, 4 or 5 years ago, the percentage of children taking psychiatric medication has increased by over 65%. That's a lot. And I feel that we need to offer children and their families hope. We need to offer them a sense of optimism, in terms of giving them something to strive for, rather than just focus on what's wrong with the kids. And that was my motivation for writing the book. I wanted to give something to teachers to help them very seamlessly and easily bring some of these ideas to life in their classroom.
It's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I like how you repeatedly like told us about how the book is going to teach you not to focus on what's wrong, because that's going to build hopelessness. Sorry, hopeful. Yeah, being you feel like you're there's no hope to you, and instead we want to offer hope. So that was like it
Hmm.
kind of really like stood out to me, and that's like a very interesting perspective that I personally haven't heard any of my managers or like leaders say that. So that's it kind of really stood to me. And also like how I just want to go into a little bit more about positive psychology, just in case if someone is not familiar with this concept. Like,
Sure.
would you like to walk us through what that is?
Surely. I think just a little brief history lesson. Um, in medicine, we have always followed a medical model. So we look at the symptoms, we look at what's wrong with somebody, and we devise treatments to alleviate the symptoms and to improve their functioning. And this is a model that has done very well when it comes to physical medicine and medical issues. In the late 19th century, Sigmund Freud, who really was the one who developed the whole idea of psychotherapy, he followed this model. So if you read a lot of his early stuff, he talks about the symptoms and what's wrong and how to relieve the symptoms. And this was the model of mental health for many, many years. Symptom relief, resolving underlying conflicts, until in the 1940s and 50s, American psychologists began to question this. And well, people have other attributes. People have curiosity. People have humor. People have passion. Where does all this fit into? How could we begin to work with people and bring this out for people? And in the late 1980s, the positive psychology model really took off in the United States. And I think it's been pretty much all over the world. And it's gone beyond mental health. We have a lot of corporations, a lot of big companies want to use it to improve motivation, improving employee engagement, and basically it looks at what's right about a person. It looks at what a person does well. And I think in the school setting, the attitude of the teacher can be, I'm very excited to be your teacher. I want to get down to business. I want to know what you do well. I want to know about you, to form a connection. And the positive psychology model makes certain assumptions about people that people do have assets and capabilities that they may not really know about. And we have to help them discover it. When I work with children, and parents, usually they come to me because they have concerns or problems, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but then I'll ask the child, I'll ask the parent, what do you do well? What does your son or daughter do well? And sometimes the child will be stuck. I don't know. I don't know what I do well. I get that a lot. And I'll say, that's okay. I said, because everybody does something well. And one of our jobs here is going to be to figure out what that is. And because I think you want to convey an attitude to a child that we're not just here to focus on problems. We're here to try to get into discovering other elements of yourself. I'll give you a brief example of how this would work in the classroom. There was a student in the school that I worked at. She was about 9 years old, and every day to school she would come late. And when she got to school, she would put her head down. She wasn't attentive. She wasn't focusing on the lessons, and she really didn't have many friends. And the student, it turns out, had attentional issues and was taking medication for it. And I was consulting with the teacher about this child, And there were different ways we could have gone. I could have reached out to the mother and said, the medication's not working. Maybe you need to have it, looked at by the prescriber to increase it. But coming from a positive, and that may have been valid, but coming from a positive psychology approach, I wanted to deal with this situation differently. So I asked the teacher, what does this girl do well? Where do you see her capabilities? And the teacher thought and said, well, when she is engaged, she is she can be motivated and she can be very organized. So we thought about how to bring that strength of organization to life for this child. So we came up with the idea of giving her a classroom job. We made her the attendance monitor. So every day she would have to go around and take attendance for the teacher. And by making her the attendance monitor, we helped to ensure that she would come into school early every day because you do it first thing in the morning. And so when the teacher approached the child, she didn't tell her, listen, you have to do this, or this is your job. Rather, the teacher said to her, I need your help. I think you would do really well with this because in the morning I'm really busy. I have a lot of things I'm doing. I'm getting ready for the day. And I really think that if you could help me, do this, it would take a lot of responsibility off my plate and I would be able to focus on other things. Well, a child loved the idea, and we gave a child a clipboard, and every day she would come in and she would walk around the room and she would just take attendance. And while she was walking around the room, she would begin to engage with some of the other students. She would begin to talk to them a little bit, and which is something she hadn't done before. And within 2 weeks, she was coming to school on time every day. She really enjoyed her job. Instead of sitting alone at lunch, she was sitting with the other children at lunch. Um, During the lessons, her head was not on the table. She was engaged. She was cooperative. She would contribute. And we really saw a major shift in this little girl. And just as a postscript to the story, the mom, who was very much for this, she reached out to me and she was very happy about what the child was doing in school. But she said, we fight a lot at home. We're not getting along. Is there anything you can suggest? So I suggested that she do what I call the good behavior book. So I said, every day when the child is home, keep a little notebook with you and just jot down every positive thing you see, no matter how big or how small. She put the dishes in the sink. She put her clothes away. She helped her sister with her homework. She said, thank you, whatever it might be. And at the end of the day, when you put her to bed, take out the book and say to her, I just want you to know I observed you doing all of these great things today, and go through the list with her. And it became a very important part of her bedtime ritual. And I think what happened there, we saw a big improvement in her behavior at home. I think it helped. What happened at school and at home is we helped change how the child viewed herself. In school, she had an experience of what she couldn't do, where she struggled at. At home, she was fighting with her mother. And that perception of herself, I think, influenced her behavior. She didn't expect much, so she wasn't going to give much. But when we conveyed to her that she had something to give, when we conveyed to her at home and at school that we see these natural assets and strengths come out, it changed her self-concept. It changed how she viewed herself. And we saw a corresponding change in her behavior. So that's just, one example how a positive psychology approach, can be helpful. And the nice thing about these interventions I write about, they don't cost any money. They're all free. So you don't have to have a budget to buy things. It's not at all necessary. So that is one way how we could see how parents and schools, and it's interesting you mentioned parents. Uh, I've been working on a follow-up to my book for parents and taking a lot of the principles that we use in the classroom to how they can use it at home. Uh, just as a quick aside, in the United States, the Surgeon General, who is sort of like the chief medical officer of the country, periodically publishes reports on health issues. And recently, he wrote that parenting is a condition that is very stress-inducing for adults. It's very risk. It puts adults at risk. for lots of reasons. There's economic pressures, there's logistic pressures, there's social media pressures, and parents are struggling. And when I've talked to teachers about using it in the classroom, many of them will come up to me privately and said, how can I use this at home with my own kids? So I see there's a need for this, and I really think it's an approach in general that provides hope and optimism, and rather than despair and hopelessness. And I think that's what people need today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. That was so valuable. And even though it's like a one example, I think a lot of teachers and educators that are listening to this can apply it. Even parents, any educators can apply positive psychology. I'm sure a lot of
Hmm.
teachers already kind of do it, but if you are doing it, make sure to keep doing it. So that is kind of the end of today's session. Thank you so much for your valuable insight, and I hope it was
Thank
helpful
you.
any educator that's listening. If you have not watched any of our episodes, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to subscribe and be notified for any new episodes. Goodbye and see you next for our next session.
Thank you.